We're talking Nick Saban's legacy. Bear Bryant, the only coach with more than 4 national championships. He has 6, all at Alabama, ranging from the early 60s to the late 1970s. Saban, along with a couple other guys, has 4. If he wins 5 tonight, certainly in the discussion of the best coach ever. And I think it doesn't matter whether he wins tonight. In my eyes, given this era of football and the parity and the other variables, I think he's the best ever. But what do we know about Bear Bryant? Here's ESPN college football analyst Butch Davis on the matter.
I grew up like Mac did, idolizing Bear Bryant and what he was able to accomplish. I mean, statistically, there's a lot of things that Nick has accomplished that's better. His bowl record is better. His winning percentage at Alabama is better. You know, obviously, if he wins tomorrow night, he's going to get his 5th national championship. But I still believe that Bear Bryant set the marquee. To be in the conversation with Bear Bryant puts you in an elite group of guys. But those of us that saw Bear Bryant coach and saw the things that he was able to do during his career, this was a man that was on the cutting edge of every change of everything that ever happened in college football. He won in a pro-style offense with Joe Namath. He morphed into the wishbone era when that became the most popular thing and figured out a way to win national championships with that. I mean, he was a marquee salesman, just a fantastic football coach. Nick Saban's the greatest one, in my opinion, of the modern era, but I think that Bear Bryant is certainly the number 1 coach in college football.
That's ESPN college football analyst Butch Davis alongside Mac Brown. So he referenced Mac for the early part of that, but just explaining why Bear Bryant was great. And that's, to me, someone who wasn't around in that era, that was very helpful because way too often we become a prisoner of the moment. And let's not forget what happened back then. So explaining why Bear Bryant was so good was very valuable.
Yeah, the thing that makes it so difficult to compare Saban to Bryant is the longevity for Bryant. He coached 38 consecutive seasons in college football, the last 25 of which were at Alabama. But he won the national title in 78 and 79, was ranked number 1 for the first half or a little bit more than that of the 1980 season, and then he ended up retiring after the 82 season. So he wasn't one of those guys who hung around too long and the game passed him by, and then he was just kind of a shell of his former self when he finally stepped down. And one of the things that kind of added to Bryant's legend, I think, is that he passed away 4 weeks after coaching his last game. And so you never got to see him in any role other than football coach. You know, he wasn't a guest on radio shows commenting on Alabama, 7 years after he had finished up. He was never on ESPN as a guest analyst. And so there's a little bit more mystique about Bryant because that's the only role. And I think that's the question with Saban is that, is he ever going to reach that point where his career takes a downturn and then he has to step away? Or is he going to go out on top? I think we always envision him going out on top. And if that's the case, I think it's very easy to think of him as one of the best ever. And so it's a difficult comparison to make, not only because of the eras, but also because his career has just been so much shorter than Bryant's.
I think Bear Bryant's track record is very interesting, how long he was there and won national championships so many years apart. But I also think there's something to be said that makes that easy, just staying at a perennial contender. And in that era, there wasn't as much parity as there is now. And you talked about the scholarships earlier.
There was no scholarship limit then. Bryant was infamous for signing not only the guys he wanted, but also signing the guys he didn't want to play against. So if he thought that Auburn or Tennessee, somebody like that, might end up with a kid, he'd offer him a scholarship just to get him on his team so he didn't have to face them.
He had a competitive advantage. And once he got it going, I think it's easier to do what he did after that point than what Nick Saban has done. Okay, he won at Michigan State. His last season with Sparty, they won 10 games. The previous time they won double-digit games was 1965, so about 35 years since the last time they won double-digit games. He helped Michigan State sort of launch, and then eventually down the road, Mark D'Antonio made him a national contender. But then he goes to LSU. LSU was not what LSU is now. LSU in the 1990s had a losing record. The year before he got to LSU, 3-8. He gets there in a couple years. He's winning a national championship. Then he goes to the NFL, comes back to college, goes to Alabama. Alabama had a losing season before he got there. What does he do? Becomes a dynasty at Alabama. Everywhere he's gone, he's had the magic touch. And in an era that has scholarship limitations, with parity, with TV being the great equalizer. And he's evolved too. Not quite what Butch Davis was saying about about Bear Bryant. He's evolved as well with pro style to the spread, brought in guys like Lane Kiffin. He has evolved, and to me, regardless if he wins or not tonight, is the best college coach ever.
His evolution is more subtle than Bryant's because there are little things, like you said, that recognizing the impact that up-tempo offenses have. I mean, he recognized it as a defensive coach, and so he said, you know what? If this is an advantage, we need to be doing it too. So Alabama started doing it. Also, we've documented plenty of times the struggles that his defense has had for a couple years against these dual-threat quarterbacks and up-tempo offenses. And this doesn't mean that Alabama has solved them, but they've certainly put themselves in a better position to defend them by getting smaller on the defensive front.
He's secure enough to know what his weaknesses are and going and get help.
And he's made adjustments. Now, Bryant's adjustments, you heard Butch Davis talk about going to the wishbone because he had kind of fallen to mediocrity. Well, the other part of that, the reason he fell into mediocrity, during the 60s, Alabama had not integrated. A lot of schools were starting to integrate. Alabama fell behind. And so it wasn't just that they needed to change their offense. They needed to upgrade their talent, and integration did that. And so those were two things that Bryant changed in the early 70s that launched the Alabama program in the 70s. So it was like two totally different areas, pre-integration and post-integration, and Bryant had success in both of those decades, the 60s and the 70s.
And it can't be just as simple as, well, he's won 6 and he's only has 4. You obviously have to win multiple championships to enter this discussion, but it just can't be as simple as that. I used the reference earlier. I got to say it again. The Celtics have won 17 NBA titles. The Lakers 16. The Celtics aren't more winning franchise. The Lakers have had 11 more appearances in the finals than the Celtics. They have more regular season wins, a better win percentage as well, more postseason wins, and a better postseason win percentage. Once you're in the neighborhood, there's other things that matter. And as you accurately pointed out, the Lakers did it over more eras where the Celtics' dominance was more concentrated. I think there's just more pieces to the puzzle. And for me with Saban was all the things I mentioned, and going to Michigan State, going to LSU, and then going to Alabama and becoming that dominant. And I just think it's so impressive what he's done with all the other reasons we discussed as well.
I think the big number for Saban, especially if they win tonight and people start talking about him versus Bear Bryant, greatest coach of all time, where he fits in that conversation is that with a victory in this game, he will have won 5 national titles in his last 11 seasons as a college football coach, going back to LSU, because you have to remove the 2 years that he was in the
think
NFL.
About what Dabo has done since 2008 to put Clemson on the cusp of 1 national championship.
That's
look
impressive.
What Saban did in all these other different stops.
Look what Urban Meyer has done, okay? And yet Saban is a different level from Meyer.